Hey everybody, Ormac here. I'm gonna go ahead and do an update to my previous Death Knight guide video for PvP, specifically to Rated Battlegrounds. The old guide is still accurate at lower gear levels. If you're looking at blue gear and just if you're a fresh 100. But as I've gone up in the gear levels and found a little bit better opponents and things and that I've discovered a few things. I just wanted to go ahead and update it and get that going. So we'll go ahead and get started. Also, I'm going to try and keep this one a little bit shorter than the other one as well. First thing I'm going to talk about here is stats, gear, and enchants. Stats. In my previous video, I mentioned that I was stacking versatility. I've since switched over to stacking mastery. Versatility, if you are in the lower gear levels, versatility I do believe is still the way to go. It's going to help you a lot more than mastery will because of the increased healing and decreased damage taken. But once you get into higher gear levels, you start getting into all the eye level 700 gear. Most of it's going to have versatility mastery on it. And the pieces that don't are still going to have some pretty good stats, so you don't have to worry quite as much about versatility. Like I'm enchanting mastery on all my stuff here, and I still have 12.6% versatility. And this is just sitting in my garrison. This isn't actually in PvP, so these numbers are going to go up obviously in PvP. So there's that. I do recommend stacking mastery at this point. Versatility isn't bad if you find yourself getting focused a lot in RBGs, or if you happen to be the designated flag carrier for your group, maybe at that point versatility might be worth stacking. But currently at this point, I think mastery is going to be the better choice. I did briefly toy with the idea, or I actually did play with enchanting mastery on both of my weapons instead of Fallen Crusader and Razor Ice like you see here. It was fun, but it actually was less damage, so I don't recommend that. As far as gear goes, I mean, you can pretty much see what I'm looking at here. Anything with versatility mastery on it is going to be number one. Other than that, haste is going to be your number 3 stat. After that, pretty much it doesn't matter. Multi-strike is slightly better than crit, just because we have killing machine. So crit is basically worthless to us. I actually got the wrong weapons here. I probably should have gotten the axes. They have a higher top end damage, so you're going to see a little bit bigger numbers there. That being said, with the swords here, I'm doing just fine as far as damage goes. There's not really that big of a difference between them. Also, I'm actually having pretty good luck. I wanted to get the strength mastery one of these, but even with the versatility one, I'm having pretty good results with using the accolade trinket and then an on-use trinket. That way, doing pretty good with that. I do have some of the other trinkets that I'm kind of keeping around, just playing with, but currently I think these are actually a pretty good set. And then as far as enchants go, I already kind of went over that, just stacking mastery on everything, or everything that you can except for your weapons, like I said. And now I'm going to go ahead and talk about, we're going to change gears here. I'm going to go ahead and talk about talents. This section is going to be very similar to the other section. Same build you can see here. Plague Leech, Lichborn, Chillblains, Runic Corruption, Death Siphon, Desecrated Ground, and Necrotic Plague. I'll get into these a little bit more in detail later as well, but Plague Leech, definitely number 1 talent here, being able to pull your diseases off of your target to activate 2 death runes. I think another poster had mentioned that Frost only has the 2 death runes, and depending on what your runic regeneration speed is, your rune speed, those death runes are really important. Since we're not stacking haste, this rune speed is going to be a little bit lower. So those 2 death runes are really important. Being able to use Plague Leech to get them or 2 others back, because it'll activate these also. That's very, very useful. Lichborn, again, by far the most powerful talent in this tier. I can think of a couple of little niche applications for these 2 talents, but I mean, in all honesty, they're terrible. Lichborn is going to be easily the best talent. Same thing in this tier. Chillblains, remember I'm doing this specifically for RBGs. Chillblains is going to be your best bet there in RBGs. Just having that having an AoE slow, a 50% movement speed slow, as much as you can spam Howling Blast, and we hit Howling Blast a lot. So that's really useful. Asphyxiate, I do run that occasionally if I happen to be running with a comp that doesn't have a lot of stuns. But for the most part, Chillblains is going to be the best bet. Next tier here, I prefer Runic Corruption. I just feel like it synergizes better with my playstyle and with the other talents I use. But Blood Tap is also a perfectly viable talent. Blood Tap, you actually can macro that into your other abilities here, so that just automatically gets used, and you end up refreshing your runes just as it becomes available as you get five charges. But like I said, personally, I prefer Runic Corruption. Since we burn all of our runic power on Frost Strike anyway, you end up getting a pretty fair use out of this. So it's not, it's not a bad thing at all. Next tier here, Death Siphon is going to be my preference. Death Pact is also useful. Conversion is terrible since we use our runic power for Frost Strike, and Frost Strike is going to be our main damage ability. We definitely don't want to use Conversion there. Death Siphon is very good, and then Death Pact also. Personally prefer Death Siphon for a couple of reasons. One, it's ranged, and two, it doesn't have a 2-minute cooldown. Death Pact is nice, but it has a 2-minute cooldown and a 25% healing absorption shield, which, I mean, yes, it heals you for 50% of your health, but then that 25% shield is actually a pretty big deal, in my personal opinion. Death Siphon does not have that, and with Plague Leech, you can actually get, depending on how you work your runes, you can actually get 4 death runes back, so you can heal, 400% of damage dealt, you can do that 4 times. That gives you a lot of healing, and then especially if you increase, use Lichborn, and since we're running Mastery, that increases Frost damage. This is Shadow Frost damage, so it's going to increase damage there. So a very powerful talent there, in my opinion. Next here, Desecrated Ground is going to be my go-to talent here. Basically, it's another trinket. It lets you get out of all of the normal abilities that you would expect, and then once you're standing in that area, it prevents application of those abilities, which is actually very useful as well. Gorfine's Grasp can be useful if you're running with, like, say, a Boomy or something like that. You can't Gorfine's into, say, an explosive trap, a Hunter's explosive trap, but you can Gorfine's into like a Solar Beam, a silence, like a Root Silence. So that can be very useful if you can get the timing right. The timing is kind of tough to do, but if you can get the timing right, that's a fantastic way to go. But my personal preference is Desecrated Ground. It just lets you stay on target a lot more, which of course lets you deal more damage, which as a Death Knight, that's pretty much your job, is to deal damage. So the last tier, Necrotic Plague, is the only viable talent here, which, like I said in my previous video, it kind of disappoints me because I really like Breath of Cinderghost. It's a really fun talent, but as Dual-Wield Frost, Necrotic Plague just outpaces Breath far and away, and Defile is even worse than that. Necrotic, you're going to be able to spread so much damage using this. It's unbelievable. Necrotic Plague, if I look at damage meters after RBGs, Necrotic Plague is always in the top 3 of my damage dealt. Usually it's the top 1 or 2, depending on how much uptime I can get on a target. But basically that depends on how much you get CC'd. And again, breaking those with Desecrated Ground helps to increase that damage too. So that's the talents, and we will get started with the glyphs here in just a second. Okay, glyphs are fairly fluid. You can use a lot of different glyphs. This is my fairly standard use that I use. Glyph of Runic Power. Personal opinion here, this one is basically mandatory. You're going to be struck by movement impairing effects all the time, so you're going to be getting runic power from that. Glyph of Animagic Shell. This one, at least in my RBG team, I've discovered that I tend to get focused a lot. So regenerative magic doesn't really work very much because AMS never expires after its full duration. It always gets used. So I've started using AMS, Glyph of AMS here, which seems to work a little better. As far as this one goes, a lot of people say not to run this because you're using Empower Rune Weapon as a damage cooldown. I prefer to also be able to use it as a defensive cooldown, depending on the situation. I've had this one save my life more times than I care to count, and it just becomes very, very useful, in my opinion. If you do have to switch out glyphs, like if you want to go to Dark Sim or Icy Touch or even Shifting Presences, something like that, I would switch out either Glyph of Empowerment or Glyph of AMS. I will say, Enduring Infection, I've tried that one. Do not use it. It is terrible. I thought for a little while that being undispellable would make the diseases more useful, more beneficial, but which it does, but it's not worth the damage reduction there. So that one's not a good glyph. Don't use that. Icy Touch, the dispel effect is really, really nice, but being Dual-Wield Frost, we never use Obliterate, which I'll get into here a little bit later in a damage rotation. But we basically never use Obliterate, so having Glyph of Icy Touch, you're never going to get your Freezing Fog procs for the free Icy Touch. And if you have runes available, you're better to use Howling Blast for more spread damage, more spread pressure, and get those, get your Necrotic Plague up, spread more. So Icy Touch Glyph, I haven't really found a lot of use for it. If you like it, if you want to use it, go for it. Same with Shifting Presences. I haven't really had an issue with it. It's good. It's not a bad glyph by any means, but I haven't really had much of an issue as far as shifting in and out of presences, needing that extra runic power. I haven't had too much of an issue with that, so I haven't really found any major benefit to shifting presences. So those are my glyph choices and the reasons behind them. Definitely, this is a very, very fluid place. Like I said, you can go ahead and use a lot of different glyphs are useful. Dark Sim is useful. Like I said, this one, Icy Touch, can be useful. There's even uses for Icebound Fortitude. If you're getting stunned a lot, you can use that offensively, and your cooldown's reduced, so you can get out of stuns even more. Using that with Desecrated Ground, you basically can't be stunned. That's actually fairly useful to use offensively. So there's a lot of different options here, and that's basically what we're looking at there. I'll go ahead and get into some more detail on a lot of the things I've talked about here in just a moment.
Okay, that wraps up part one for this. Go ahead and click here for part two, which I'm going to go over damage, ability usage, macros, UIs, add-ons, that kind of thing, and then just some general pros and cons of Dual-Wield Frost. So go ahead and click for part two.